Good morning from London. I'm David Newman, the Managing Director of BBIA. Welcome to the third in this 4 series of webinars that are organized by Futamura and the BBIA. For those of you who have not been able to attend the previous 2 webinars, just to remind you that they are on the BBIA website. The first webinar talked about how compostable materials are made and produced. The second webinar spoke about how they're used and the suitable applications for them. And the third webinar today, with this really illustrious panel of speakers, we'll be talking about how we attempt to identify and label and mark compostables, and also about how we certify them and what the certification process means. It's complicated, so you will need to be attentive. So get your coffees ready, and we'll be shooting away in a minute or 2. The 4th webinar, which concludes the series with Futamura, will be on the 28th of September, and we're pleased there to host government officials from the ministries DEFRA and BASE. Those who are not British who are listening in, those are the ministries of and the ministries of the Ministry of what used to be called the Ministry of Industry, and they will be with us on the 28th, and there we will be talking about policy. Now, let me introduce you to today's speakers. We have Lucy Cowton, who is from Futamura and is an expert on certification. We have Margaret Bates from OPRL, which is positioning itself to be the UK's go-to consultancy and go-to place for labelling packaging. We have Percy Foster. Percy and I think we've known each other for 20 years. You don't look old enough for all that time. Percy Foster, who is the Managing Director of CRAE, which is the Irish Composting and Biogas Association, and we'll be looking at the work they've done there in Ireland. And we have Rob Thompson from the Co-op Food Group. Co-op Food Group, as many of you know here in the UK, are one of the first pioneers of the use of compostable carrier bags. And then we'll be talking about labelling. Now, you know the rules with webinars. We've been going through them for 6 months now. If you want to ask a question, there's a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. Send me your questions, please, and I will pop them to the speakers either immediately after their presentations or at the panel session when they are back after everybody is finished. Got it? Good. Good to go. Lucy, welcome, and you're going to introduce us to the rather complicated and complex question of certification. Everybody asks me, but do compostables work? Well, tell us.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Just hang on a second while I get my presentation up. Now I can't see that. Can you see that?
Yes, we can see it perfectly.
You can? Okay, must just be something on my computer because I can't. Sorry, hang on 2 seconds. Oh, it's so well in the practice. Sorry?
Now we can see your email.
Okay, that's not great.
So, yeah, you want to close that down, and there we go. Now we can see the presentation again.
Okay, well, sorry, it's on the other screen, but I'm not going to move it, so you might just see a slight side view rather than me looking at the camera. But anyway, so okay, so I'm the certification manager for Futamura, and before I talk about certification, just wanted to give a bit of sort of background as to why we think sort of certification compostability is important. Sorry, I'm now struggling to change my slides. It's not going well. There we go. So this is just, and the infographic is just a vision of how compostable packaging fits in the circular economy. So you can see as you sort of start from your readily renewable resources, these can be manufactured into compostable packaging. Packaging extends shelf life, reduces food waste, just in the same way that you get with excuse me, with conventional packaging. And this can be easily identified by a sort of a recycling logo, which obviously Margaret will talk about a little bit later in the webinar. The packaging can be recycled with organic waste for easy recovery, can be collected, delivered to the recycling plant, thereby diverting the waste from the landfill, and going through the process, obviously, have been organically recycled, generating biogas for renewable energy, and also the valuable compost, which helps with the soil, helps to improve the soil quality, and obviously back around the loop. And there are key drivers now from the environmental bill, which state that mandatory separate household food waste collections across England will be in place by 2023. And they also want to eliminate food waste from landfill by 2030. And we think, you know, there are particular applications which are best suited to composting, and obviously can go around this loop. And so, sorry, I've just realised I'm not in presentation mode. So in terms of industrial composting, we have a number of different standards. So probably the one that everyone knows the best, EN 13432, the European standard. Similar standards as well, that's for non-packaging materials. We've got American US standards as well, ASTM D6400 and D6868, which is more for paper products. The global standards, and also as an Australian standard as well. And essentially these are all very similar. Probably the main difference is really with the Australian norm, which also includes worm toxicity. So to certify a product for industrial compostability, you need to carry out the required tests, which are obviously dictated by the standard at an approved test house, submit the test reports, samples, formulations, structures, safety data sheets to the certification body. And the certification bodies, we work closely with Dinsertco, TUV Austria, Real in the UK, they sort of work in collaboration with Dinsertco. And then you've got the American and the Australian certification bodies as well, so the BBIA and the ABA. And once you've gone through the certification process, you're eligible to use the logos below. Probably the seedling logo is the best known logo, but Dinsertco have their own logo as well, the Dingerproof logo, TUV Austria have their own OK Compost logo, and obviously you can see the BBI logo as well. But to go sort of through in more detail, so just as an overview, there are 4 elements that you need to be certified. So chemical characterization, you also need biodegradability, the disintegration, and the ecotoxicity as well. So in terms of the sort of chemical characteristics, I've already mentioned you need to know the composition, obviously, or constituents of your material. You need to measure the organic carbon content solids so that you can ensure that the volatile solids are a minimum of 50%. And you also need to ensure that there are no hazardous substances present. So the heavy metals as well must be within required limits. The certification body will also require an infrared spectrum for identification purposes, and obviously you need to know the thickness to which you want to certify. So the biodegradability. So the test method used here is ISO 14855, and each constituent that's present in greater than 1% must be greater than 90% biodegradable, and the test period here is 6 months, although I know when we've tested our materials, normally within 45 days we've reached the required limits, and this is tested at about 58 degrees C. And the other point to note on the biodegradability is that the sum of the materials that are non-biodegradable must not exceed 5%. So the disintegration, so this must be checked in the final form. The controlled pilot scale test is the one that's used, so ISO 16929. And for this, the maximum temperature must be above 60, but below 75. So again, the temperatures are reasonably high. And the duration of the testing here is 12 weeks. And at the end of the test, not more than 10% of the material should be bigger than 2 millimeters, basically. And also you must have no visual contamination of the compost either. And you can see in the image there, this is one of our metallized films. And within about sort of 6, certainly by 8 weeks, all of the film is completely disintegrated. And then ecotoxicity and compost quality. So this is a test that's carried out on summer barley and cress. This is based on the OECD 208 method. And here the germination rate and the plant biomass must be greater than 90% of the blank compost, and must be no sort of negative effects on the compost quality either. So sort of various things like the solid salt content, pH, some of the nitrogen derivatives are measured just to ensure that there aren't any negative impacts. You can see in the picture shown, I think the top one is actually the compost with the test compost, and then you've got the sort of the blank and the reference below. You can actually see in this instance that you have more plant biomass with the test compost than you do with the reference and the blank samples. So in terms of when to certify, I guess you can really certify raw materials, you can certify intermediates, and you can also certify final products. So you can certify a polymer. The stage that we certify our materials are all films, so they're intermediates. But obviously our sort of customers certify the final products, and this is where it's important to measure the disintegration on the final product. And this is the point, obviously, where the films are eligible for the logos once you've got the certification. Can be taken further. I know Percy's going to talk about the Cray system. We've actually tested our film through their system, and the film's approved, although not certified because it's not a final product. But I'll leave Percy to talk about that. So we talked a bit about industrial composting. Just wanted to mention home composting as well. So the standards, there are standards available obviously for home composting. There's the Australian standard, the French standard, and then we've got 2 standards that are just in development still. So these are for carrier bags suitable for treatment in home composting facilities, and also can measure the degree of disintegration as well. The other standard that is probably most well known is the OK Compost Home standard from TUV Austria. And all of these standards generally mimic the sort of conditions in EN 13432. The main difference is that the temperatures are lower for both the biodegradation and the disintegration, and also the time frames are longer. So for biodegradation, sort of 12 months, and for the disintegration, just 6 months rather than 3 months. And if you have obviously the certifications, there are logos that go alongside these certifications as well. So again, the DING Proof logo, the TUV OK Compost Home logo, and the one in the middle is the Australian home composting logo. And then thought I'd just finish off with the final slide. There are other certifications available as well. So OK Biodegradable soil. So this is generally for horticultural or agricultural products, and again a biodegradation test is required, although the time frame is longer, up to 2 years. Again, need to ensure no ecotoxicity or toxic impacts, and no visual contamination as well. And then we've got OK Biodegradable water. So this is an aqueous biodegradation test. Again, heavy metals testing is needed. And this is beneficial really for products which might accidentally be flushed, so things like sanitary packaging for sanitary products. And finally, OK Biodegradable marine. So this is based on the sort of the US standard, and actually the requirements are very stringent. It kind of mimics EN 13432 in that you need 90% biodegradation, the 90% disintegration, still in 3 months, and also a Daphnia ecotoxicity test as well. And that's it. Thank you.
Well, the 101 lesson on certification is 7 minutes. Well done, not bad. Now, I'm always throwing the question, Lucy, and I hope you can answer it for the audience, and that is, well, what happens to the other 10%? If the biodegradation test is 90%, can the other 10% go to soil as microplastics? Will it pollute? Why is it only 90%? Why is it not 100%?
Well, I guess 90% is the sort of the pass criteria. So just because 90% is the pass, it doesn't mean that you only achieve 90%. I should imagine many products achieve much more than 90%. So it's not really a remaining 10%. There are, I mean, obviously you can only have up to sort of 5% of materials that are non-biodegradable. So there are materials within there that ultimately might not biodegrade, won't biodegrade. But these are all materials, you know, the ecotoxicity has been tested and it has been proven that there are no, you know, no toxic effects, no toxic impacts on the compost.
Okay, good. Thank you, Lucy. You'll be back on the panel, and now I believe it is over to Percy, isn't it? Next. Is that correct?
Yeah, David.
Yes, it is. Good. Okay, well, I couldn't remember the running order there for a moment. I'm sorry, I got distracted. Percy, tell us about what's happening in Ireland. Welcome.
Okay, thanks, David, for the invite. I'll just share my screen. Can you see the...
You can see perfectly.
Is it the slideshow on?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay, David, thanks for the invite to give a presentation today. My presentation is just going to be very short and very kind of high level of an overview of what we've been doing recently in Ireland. As David mentioned before, I work for CRAE, which is the Irish Composting and Biogas Association in Ireland. So if you're wondering what CRAE means, CRAE is the Irish word for soil. As David knows me for the last 20 years, CRAE is actually nearly 20 years old itself, so we're like any other trade body, we're non-for-profit. Some other background details in Ireland is we've had national legislation where it's required to source segregate bio-waste by householders and populations above 500. But recently our waste policy was announced, a new waste policy, and that's going to change where that cap of 500 is going to be removed. So all householders will be required to segregate their food waste and bio-waste. Historically in Ireland, supports developing AD have been very poor, so we have very little AD in comparison to the UK. So the vast majority of our bio-waste and food waste is actually processed in vessel composting plants in Ireland. So what's been happening in Ireland, I think for the last 2 or 3 years, the use of compostable products have been growing. There's been a lot of people from packaging companies to waste collectors to processors asking about the various terminology. What does biodegradable mean? Compostable, oxidogradable? There's been a lot of different certificates been shown to people, and a lot of people don't understand what they mean. We've also come across some situations where maybe some certificates aren't correct. So there's been a lot of discussion around this at the moment by everybody in the sector. I think from a processor's perspective, they were a little bit afraid that with all this new products coming onto the market, are they really going to be compatible with Irish composting plants? Is there going to be enough education of the public so people don't get confused? Because composite materials look very similar to conventional plastics. So they were afraid that maybe people that might be poorly educated, that it might result in more conventional plastics being put into our food waste bins and then cause contamination for the composting process. So there was a lot of discussion. We had a lot of meetings with stakeholders in Ireland around this topic, from the processors to the packaging companies. So it was a hot topic. This is just a slide where I just wanted to show, we hired a company called Red Sea. They're kind of an independent company to do a lot of political polling in Ireland. So they did a survey for us where they contacted 1,000 householders around Ireland, different ages, different parts of the country, so it was widely spread around the country. And they asked him some questions about compostable materials. And I think this response here from one of the questions is clearly gave us a driver that people would more inclined to buy compostable materials if they knew that they were locally certified and they break down in composting plants locally. So 70%, so that's 700 people out of 1,000 people said that they would. So our solution to this, after talking to everybody, was to come up with our own certification scheme in Ireland. It's very much building on the certification schemes that are out there already for EN 13432 that are managed by TUV and Incerto. So what we do is products which are certified to EN 13432, we test them in an Irish composting plant to make sure they're compatible with our processes. If the product breaks down and it passes, then people can take out a license to use the logo. So as you can see from the logo, that was probably the most difficult part in the entire process. And I kind of learned that consensus by committee doesn't work. But we kind of got there in the end through a lot of discussions of coming up with a very simple logo that was geared towards the public to really understand. You put it in your food waste bin, it's compostable, and then our name underneath it to give it a bit of legitimacy. So really, we're trying to use the logo to educate the public what bin it can go into and that it's compostable. And products in the scheme, you know, they get access to the market in Ireland as well. So with CRAE, as I mentioned, is a trade body. So with this entire process, we set up a separate company, a wholly owned subsidiary called CRAE Certification Ireland, and they manage the entire process. So we have an independent board of directors. We have separate team as well that manage the entire process as well. So we are about just under a year in the process, so it's early days. And I've decided to take a gamble to see if a little video can play. It's just a very short animation, and it's going to show the types of products that we've certified so far. So fingers crossed, the video will play. So really, this is just going to be a selection of some of the type of products we've certified. So bread, Brennan's bread is in every household in Ireland, so that was certified. Coffee cups and lids, they're very common as well. We've certified a range of those as well. And more recently, some food pouches as well. So that kind of gives you an idea of a range of some of the products we've certified. And on our website, compostable.ie, that has a full list of the products that have been certified and people who've taken out a license. So really, oops. Anyway, that's really just coming to the end of my presentation. It's just very short presentation to give an overview of what we've been doing recently in Ireland as a case study. And really, we've got a lot of support so far by the industry. The government is now supporting us through mywaste.ie. That's the government central hub for waste information. So they've helped promote our logo as well. So we've got a lot of positive feedback in that we've kind of removed all the confusion. We've kept things very simple. It might appear to be very simple, but it's taken a lot of work and effort to get to this stage. And thanks for listening in to my presentation, and we have more information on our website. Thank you.
Thanks, Percy. That was simple, clear, and straightforward. Couple of questions. To get the certification from CRAE, you have to presumably be 13432 certified already.
Correct, that's right.
Okay, so the two are completely compatible.
They are, yeah.
Good. The second question is, if you're a composter and the 13432 says that the process can take 12 weeks, but your composting process takes less, does that mean that the compostable packaging doesn't break down in time?
So Our process is that it has to break down in an Irish composting process. So we looked at the entire industry and we figured out what the normal time roughly is. And we have a plant that we use where we test and make sure it breaks down. And obviously, as you know, David, in many of the new composting type systems, the duration of composting is a lot less than 12 weeks. So that, I suppose, is the key difference, I suppose, in our system, that it has to break down during the typical period for Irish composting.
Which may be less than 12 weeks.
Yeah, so typically you're talking 6-7 weeks.
Okay, and they do break down in that time.
Yeah.
Yeah, because people ask this question, Percy, and I'll labour it for 1 minute. And you can ask the same question, of course, about a tree, can't you? A leaf from a tree will break down in a week, a branch will break down in a month, and a trunk will take 2 years, but they're all compostable. So, of course, a composting plant will know, generally speaking, that at the end of the process, there will be some oversize that hasn't broken down, and they will put them back into the beginning of the process and run them through again, generally. Is that the case too in Ireland? Yeah,
that would be the typical case in Ireland as well. So that stuff would go around and oversize potentially as well.
Yeah, okay. Good. All right, thanks, Percy. That was really clear. And please be on the panel after the end of the other two presentations. Thank you, because there's more questions for you.
Thanks.
Now it's my pleasure to introduce Rob Thompson. Rob is from the Co-op Food Group in Manchester, and the Co-op, correct me if I got that right, wrong, Rob, the Co-op Food Group is one of those who have been, as a retailer, promoting the use of compostable carrier bags for some time. Explain to us what this means and also how you identify them for your customers. Thanks.
Yes, that's right. Let me just get my screen on. So yeah, we are the cooperative group. Can you see my screen okay?
Yes, indeed.
Yeah, cool. So we are the world's biggest consumer-owned, member-owned consumer goods group. We have about 5 million members in the UK and about 2,500 stores. We're also the leading funeral care provider, and we have insurance businesses. But I work for the food group. I'm the packaging technologist for the food group. And one of the things that's in our DNA is standing up for what our members believing in. And so at our AGM 2 years ago, our members voted, over 99% of members voted to make all of our packaging recyclable. And so over the years, that's been where we have really positioned ourselves. The mantra really has been, to paraphrase Prince Charles, keeping plastics in the economy and out of the oceans. As I say, our main strategy on packaging so far has been to maximise the mechanical recyclability and to use as much recycled content as we can. So a lot of the focus of what we've been doing over the years has been around rigid plastics, so pots, tubs and trays. We've been doing things like moving those into monomaterials, removing the non-detectable pigments, and in bottles where we've been increasing the recycled content. So in all of our waters, soft drinks and mixers, we're now at 100% rPET, for example. We have also been successful in influencing the labelling system that's used to communicate recyclability. So Margaret will tell you that we have a database with all of the local authorities in England, Wales, Northern Ireland, and Scotland, and we're constantly monitoring what those local authorities are collecting, and therefore our database is used by OPRL to work out what percentage of local authorities are collecting what materials and therefore how they are to be labelled. We have made some changes away from conventional oil-based plastics. But that has tended to be more to increase the recyclability of those materials. So we have moved into what technically would be biodegradable materials, although that is often coincidental to improving the recyclability. So in our pizza discs, for example, we removed the expanded polystyrene and replaced them with corrugated cardboard. In tomatoes, we removed the carbon black BET trays and we replaced those with card trays. That gave us a big advantage in terms of marketing because you can print all over that carton, which you can't do with a rigid plastic. And we actually saw an increase in sales on tomatoes when we did that. We also have a stream of work that's looking at avoiding uncontrolled loss to the environment or plastic pollution. And we do have a strong track record on this. So we were the first retailer to remove plastic stems from our cotton buds in 2006. We took the microbeads out of our cosmetic products over 16 years ago. And we did that because we know that those items are often disposed of. That is a test, sorry. I forgot we have a fire alarm test on Friday mornings. But yeah, we've removed microbeads and cotton stems on our plastic stems on our cotton buds. But that's because we know that those items are often disposed of through the sewerage system and can contribute to plastic pollution. The other area where we have plastics that are sometimes disposed of through food waste collections is tea bags. So we brought this to the attention of the media about 2 years ago now, and it's been featured in a BBC programme very recently. We use about 9 tonnes a year of polypropylene in our own brand tea bags. We have had some technical issues to overcome. But we think that by early next year, we'll be into PLA for tea bags to remove the polypropylene, which we know is often entering composting systems and then getting spread on land inadvertently. So the main area where we have been focusing on compostable materials is in our carrier bags. We started to promote these about 2 years ago again. And part of the strategy on this is to encourage more and more councils to start to collect food waste. So we only sell these bags in the areas where the councils do collect food waste. And the idea is that if you forget your reusable bag, you can buy one of these carrier bags for 5p. And when you get home, you can use it as a caddy liner. They are actually cheaper than buying caddy liners, and they're much more user-friendly because they're bigger and they have the handles that you can hook over the side of your caddy. And they were featured in the Sun newspaper as one of Mum's best buys. So on our compostable carry bags, in terms of labelling, we have a number of stakeholders that we're trying to influence. The first one is the customer. So we want to make sure that the customers know what these bags are for and that they're using them correctly. So we have a series of simple instructions on the front of the bag. Secondly, we've got the collection crews. We want them to know that we are using the right bags. So we communicate that by the use of the green colour and the seedling logo, which is always in the gusset, away from the instructions. Thirdly, we have the local authorities. So we want them to have confidence that we are giving our customers and collection crews the right advice. And we do use their feedback in the design improvements as we go through design iterations. And we want them to know that the correct certification is in place. So again, we have the logos in the gusset to give those local authorities confidence that we are using the right materials. Similarly, the waste management contractors need to know that information. So again, we communicate to them through use of the colour and the seedling logo. And finally, the national government. So we want them to have confidence that we do have a joined up, consistent approach that's being taken to give external acceptance for when consistency of collection and universal food waste collections comes into force with extended producer responsibility measures in 2023. So we would really like to see these rolled out across all retail, with the main focus being on reusable bags, but for people to have the option to buy these and reuse them as a food waste caddy liner. What we would really like to see is some kind of a national certification scheme. So in Italy, this logo is used, the compostable CIC, which I believe David was involved in designing that system. The good thing about that is that for us, it would mean that we wouldn't need to approach every council individually and do local trials. That certification scheme would give us confidence that the local authorities can accept those materials without having to do a lot of external testing. There are some other items where we would see use of compostable materials being a bonus. So on some items where it's unnecessary to label them, we know that these materials are being disposed of through food waste collections. So small labels on fresh fruit, for example, we've moved our fresh fruit labels into the Sinclair Eco label because we know that the polypropylene labels are often disposed of with the peelings and end up getting into food waste collections. Tea bags, again, we're moving out of PP into PLA. Some items that are too small to be collected or too small to be mechanically recycled through the sorting machinery routes at the MRFs. So things like tamper evident bands that you get around jars of sauces and mayonnaise bottles, and small portion packs for things like milk and mayonnaise. We can see those potentially being used using compostable materials. And then in some instances, using compostable materials, we believe can give added value to improving the shelf life of our products. So, for example, in potatoes, we believe using a compostable material would give us an extension to shelf life and prevent greening. And the peach pads that are often used to soak up blood and liquor on things like cheeses, fish and meat, once they've been saturated with food waste, those things are going to be undesirable to most recyclers, and therefore I can see an application for those within compostable materials. To get some of these items accepted into food waste collections, we will need a marking system, and we believe that it should be agreed between the major stakeholders, and that those stakeholders must include the composters and the AD operators. We don't think it should just be a small logo on the pack. It needs to be something that is distinctive, and for some types of packaging, it needs to be recognizable on fragments. So on bags, for example, where they are shredded, if the logo is just on one small part of the gusset, you've lost traceability on those items. So it needs to be decipherable on fragments, not just the entire pack. And the use of the logo needs to be protected and controlled by some kind of a central body that is responsible for making sure that the people using the logo are actually using correct materials that can be disposed of through the composting route. And it doesn't necessarily have to be over complicated. So Percol is one of our suppliers. They moved into compostable pods for their branded coffee machine pods. They just have a green band around the base of the pod, and it could be something just as simple as that. So that's the view from the co-op. I think we have time for a couple of questions, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thanks, Rob, and thanks for the fire alarm. I almost jumped out of my chair when I heard that.
Yeah, sorry about that. I completely forgot about that.
That's all right. Just a couple of comments. Firstly, that the Italian compostable logo is the 13432 certification standard. Of course, it just gives an identity to it. I just wanted for the audience to clarify that. And a question from Sandy Martin is how are the co-op group in actually pushing policies for greater acceptance of compostables? I know Ian, particularly Ian Ferguson, is quite active. You know, to what extent are you pushing for the greater acceptance of these materials?
Well, we have written to DEFRA as part of the consistency of collection consultation that took place. Our main focus has been on mechanical recycling. So we believe that getting to a circular economy for plastics is the way forward. But we do recognise that there are some cases where using compostable materials is the best route forward, and those are the examples that I outlined in the presentation.
Cool. Thank you. Okay, Rob. Hang around for the panel. There'll be more questions. And now trying to make sense of all this and to get us the miracle logo, the miracle label, the miracle marking that's going to say, yeah, we all understand what compostables now are, is Margaret Bates. Who better? Former chair of CIWM, former professor of waste and resource management at Nottingham University. For you will tell me if I got that right. And now managing director of the BBIA. Welcome. You're muted.
Right, I'm just trying to share my screen. So hopefully that will do
Yeah.
it. So I'm going to give you a bit of an introduction to OPRL because I don't know how many people are aware of it, though clearly some people asking questions are. So OPRL is the on-pack recycling label. As David said, I joined them in February, so relatively recent, and it hasn't stopped. So one of the things that you might not know about OPRL, so lots of people wonder what we are. So we're independent. We're licensed by RAP to use the Recycle Now swoosh. And we have a number of different guarantors. So you'll notice in there, for example, we have Larac, an ink pen, and most of the main materials associations. And it's a constant review, and we are totally materials agnostic. Personally, I believe that pretty much all packaging materials have a role, but in certain spaces, and that there isn't one solution that will solve the whole problem. So when I first started, as I said, in February, we were hoping to try and get 500 members. We're now closer to 600 members. We, as of yesterday, 567 members, increasing at a ridiculous rate, to be honest. And the key thing is we're an evidence-based label. So 3 in 4 citizens recognise, understand and act on our labels. So whether they're confused by Mobius loop, green dot or resin codes, they actually understand what our labels mean. We've recently moved to a binary label, and I always kind of have to do a bit of reservation on the binary label, and I'll come back to that in a minute. And we work with the whole supply chain to ensure that packaging is designed, procured and labelled so that it's easy to recycle it, that it is being collected and it can be sorted. And we have quite a strong ethical thing as well. Some of you may have seen that we recently launched our first SDG report as well. So recently UNEP did a report on labels across the world, and we were only one of 3 to get full positive responses, partly because we now have this system where we look at what are the local sources. So people regularly say to us, oh, so would this apply in France, for example? And you would have to look at what they collected in France to see if it would as well. The only thing that was wrong with this is we haven't been around for 20 years. We've recently celebrated our 10-year anniversary. So if you look at the labels, and these are starting to come through in the shops now. So I'll refer to this again later. They're founded on ISO 14021 principles, and these are for self-declared environmental claims. Though maybe I sound cynical, but we don't really trust people with their self-declared environmental claims. So if you're a member of OPRL using our labels, you will be audited by our audit partners using a system developed specifically for us every 3rd year. So the key labels we now have are recycle and don't recycle. And to get a recycle label, more than 75% of councils need to collect it for recycling. The industry needs to be able to sort it and reprocess it for recycling, and it needs to be sold on as for recyclers. So there needs to be a market for it. So basically, if something's got an OPRL recycle label on it, if you put it in the right bin, so you follow the instructions on the label, then you've got a realistic expectation that it is being recycled. So when I say we have some exceptions, so we have different labels for beverage cartons who are working very hard to get their 75% recycling at curbside up, but they do have a lot of bring banks as well. We have our first ever on the go, which is the recycle coffee cups at coffee shops. And also we have, for PE bags and films and wrappings, we have recycle with bags at large supermarkets. So this is on a number of things such as bread bags that you might see in your home. So looking at things that break down without leaving a residue, because one of our issues is where does this fit and where do we start? So there's a huge, as I'm sure many people on the audience know much better than me, there's a huge complexity and variety in different biodegradable, compostable, industrial compostable, home compostable. So where do we start? So one of the key things is, for example, packaging that's heavily contaminated with organic material or food will not be suitable for materials recycling. So that would seem to me a great area for things that are compostable or degradable. And also packaging that could facilitate the recovery of waste organics. So for example, bags around food that could be then used for food collections. The trouble is that we have a number of people who make claims that aren't valid. And I remember being with David at Packaging Innovation and watching him cross names off the list of people he didn't think were justifying their claims. And also that consumers don't really understand it properly, and there is no consistent labeling for identification, though I know that there are quite a lot of labels out there. So for industrial composting, there's a clear standard. People have talked about 13432, but the trouble is in the UK, a lot of our recycling infrastructure, or our organics recycling infrastructure, isn't fully set up to treat the compostable plastics, so tend to remove it as contamination. Basically, if you've got plastic in there, it's not very obvious whether it's compostable or not, take it all out because you're better off to be on the safe side. It doesn't help that UK AD facilities do not have a composting stage. And I should explain that, that at the moment I'm really thinking around the AD things because of that food waste contamination. If everyone was IVC, maybe it would be easier, but that's not the situation we're in. So when you've got your plastic in there, as Rob was alluding to earlier, you know, if you've got plastic debris in it, you can't tell until you've waited past the desired time whether it was degradable plastic or non-degradable plastic. So it tends to all be removed. There are also some standards, as I said, we comply with ISO 14021. So there are a number of claims around those, which realistically don't seem to compete with 13432. So they're relating to the overall value of compost as a soil amendment, concentrations that Lucy talked about earlier, or reducing the rate of composting in those systems. So that's quite an important factor for us, and I'll explain in a minute why these are so important to us. So also it needs to be convenient to a reasonable proportion of purchasers, potential purchasers and users where the packaging or product is sold. And I have to tell you that not only for compostable or biodegradable, this is one of the things that keeps me constantly challenged, trying to determine what these are. And that's why some of the focus now, from my point of view, is on anaerobic digestion because of those compulsory food waste collections, and the fact that probably about 80% of those food waste collections will end up going to AD. It's also very clear about what claims you can and cannot make. So you can't have it's compostable where facilities exist. It needs to be compostable and available to the majority of citizens or not. So we can't have any sort of wriggle room in that. So when I'm looking at it, the key things that I think from an OPRL point of view, and we are having discussions around this, it's not just in my head. So it conforms with EN 13432. It's not also labelled recyclable. Now that might seem unfair, and I know people who have materials that they say are compostable and recyclable. And I'm not saying that's not true, but what I am saying is that it's confusing to a consumer. They need a very strict, clear instruction that tells them where to put it. And anything that's more complicated than that is unlikely to do it. So if we're going to look at something that's going into AD, it needs to probably be something that would be of a suitable dimension to be disposed of in a food waste caddy, or to be used as a food waste caddy liner. It needs to have no measurable residue of plastic after the process and any accompanying realistic maturation phase. So it's not if only the process did this would happen. It needs to be the situation we're in. It needs to not physically impede the anaerobic digestion process. So it needs to be compatible with the systems we have, not impact on the quality of the compost or any digest aid, only contain degradable components, not require any consumer actions that require tools. So we're very strict that if you need a knife or a pair of scissors or anything else to make it work, you can't do that. And so we're looking around something loosely calling recycle with food waste. Yeah, because on the basis that we're looking for full food waste coverage is one thing, but also that means if you don't have food waste collections, then your food waste probably goes in the bin, and so you can put it in there. Or if you've got a mixed food waste or garden waste collection, then you would assume those systems were set up for it as well, so it could also go with there. So a lot of the testing we've been talking about is related to composting. So is it always clear that that works for AD? So AD is, although it produces energy-rich gas that we can use, which is why a lot of people have moved to AD, the actual AD process is less efficient than aerobic processes are. Would it be a criteria that it needs to be in direct contact with food or drink, or could be used as a food waste caddy liner? Are there any other criteria that we would need? How would you differentiate between the look of something that was compostable and the look of something that wasn't? Or do we put a system in where we have industry agreement and then we lobby that those things are only made in degradable formats? How about the collection? So what do we do about that? And how do we make sure that the AD industry is fully engaged at all levels to make sure they'll take whatever we label correctly? Thank you.
Well, I think questions as answers.
Yeah.
Of course, the UK has got this, a large wet AD industry. We don't really treat a hell of a lot of food waste in it yet. But of course, with food waste collections coming across the whole of England in a couple of years' time, there will be some 2 to 3 million tonnes extra. And as you know, Margaret, I'm the president of the World Biogas Association, as well as this work here with BBIA, and I'm a great fan of anaerobic digestion. But it is very singular that Great Britain has a system where there is no post anaerobic treatment of the outputs. For example, in either dry AD systems or in other countries, those materials then go to an aerobic or compost treatment system and go back to soil in a more solid form, and therefore you can recover your compostable packaging in that process. Of course, that all costs more, doesn't it? And that's the reason why it hasn't been done. But you know the industry probably as well as anybody in the UK. I mean, do you feel that there is some recognition that the way it has been set up needs to be modified, or do you think that people are entrenched in positions and don't want to move?
I think it would need to be evidence-based about the change, and I think generally the resource industry has maybe had to respond to media, or had to respond to less well-informed government decisions. And so I think having the evidence base and providing the support for them. So I think there's general agreement that there is a really, really important role for these materials going forward. You know, there's a whole host of food contact things, sachets, whatever, that really are not going to be suitable for mechanical recovery, or might have still a high product residue in it. And I think we need to have a situation where if we see that there's a problem, then we need government to work with us to say how we resolve that problem, because if it's a valuable role, we should be doing it. And maybe, you know, maybe there's other systems we could set up that would help, you know, or support mechanisms.
Thank you, Margaret. The one single question that I have for you is, somebody got very excited here and thought, well, this recycle with food waste label is ready to go, but of course we're a long way away from it yet, aren't we?
Yeah, but hopefully part of the idea of trying to focus on a relatively small bit of a complex industry will mean that we could maybe prove the point with that. And maybe if people understand that you can set those mechanisms up. I mean, you and I, David, have had numerous conversations about this, and it may be that it's moving slowly, but I still think it is moving. You know, the direction of travel is right. So if we can prove it on these things, then, you know, we've got a proof of concept that we can start to spread out. Because the stuff we're talking about, it's not going to go to mechanical recycling. If it is collected, it's not, a lot of it isn't going to make it through a MRF. So it's not going to go for chemical recycling either, which is the way we're all hoping that we'll recycle the stuff we haven't quite recycled yet. So we've got to find an alternative for this. And I think, you know, the whole degradable materials is the way forward for that.
Yeah, there's this conflict, isn't there? And it hasn't sort of worked out, and there's a great deal of confusion between the mechanical sphere and the biosphere. You know, we're all hitting away on the mechanical sphere, because I suppose as children we grew up with Lego and building bricks and Meccano, and we know, you know, how to take a radio apart and all that. So we get all excited about mechanical recycling of whatever it is, but we actually forget that the biosphere is the place that gives us our food. The biosphere is the place that gives us clean water and clean air to breathe. The compostables fit into that sphere rather than into the mechanical sphere. Of course, it's much less sexy, and it's probably much less profitable, and it's much more difficult to understand. But that's the argument we have to have. That's the discussion we have to have. Percy, would you like to come back onto screen? And a couple of questions for Percy and for Lucy. The question about labeling and the times of certification and the times of composting comes up, as you can see from the questions, once or twice here. And I think the question is, firstly for you, Lucy, but also for Percy, is if you have a standard for composting, the PAS 100 standard for compost that goes to soil, is does the 13432 or does the CRAE certification standard meet that? Because if you have compost which goes to soil, which can't have any more than 0.25% of contaminants, do your compostables meet that standard? Are they compatible?
I have to confess, I'm not so familiar with the PAS standard, and I'm not sure that there's sort of work ongoing to try and bring those closer together. And so whether that means that, you know, an additional test may be needed to, you know, to verify that, because I don't think in EN 13432 you don't detect down to those sort of levels. I think the testing would be different.
Okay.
To verify that.
Percy?
Yeah, I like Lucy, I don't know the specific standard in PAS 100, but I suppose in our scheme, we use the same criteria as in EN 134. As Lucy outlined in her presentation, there has to be no more than 10% of the original product left over 2 millimeter. That's the PAS criteria in our standard. So that's kind of where we are.
Okay. Emily Nichols from the Renewable Energy Association and is listening in online. Rob, would you like to give Emily the microphone, please? Because she has a point that I'd like her to make rather than me make it for her. Could you give Emily? There we are, Emily. Welcome. Take off your mute and go ahead, please. We can't see you, Emily, but I think we can probably hear you if you talk.
I will speak. Can you hear me now?
Yes, faintly.
Okay, I'll just turn up the volume. Okay, so we have been, I suppose, talking with the BBIA about a number of these issues for some time, and we are sort of looking into and contributing to a BBIA supported project which is considering the potential for AD facilities to collaborate within vessel composting, so that where liners, bags and suitable kinds of compostable packaging go into food waste bins, and what's in those bins is only certified compostable items, or you know, there's very little other packaging or plastic contamination. The ID facility could potentially front end remove the packaging and send it to an IVC facility. So that option does have some potential if we can get the bin users understanding and putting only certified compostable items in food waste bins. Yeah, there's some other issues in connection with this, but that's the point that I put on the Q&A panel just recently.
Okay, thank you, Emily. Yes, I haven't mentioned that, but we hopefully will by sometime in October we'll present a study which we've commissioned of AD and composting facilities to see what the issues are with regard to managing compostables, and we hopefully will be able to come out with that in about a month or so's time, and REA have been helping us with that quite deeply. A question for all of you on the panel, and Margaret, you raised this, the question of confusion. Britain has been for some reason the home of lots of materials which call themselves biodegradable, but actually are not compostable and don't fit into food waste or garden waste collection and treatment systems. what would you do about that? Some countries, for example, Belgium, have outlawed the use of the word biodegradable. If it's not compostable, it's not anything. Is that a route that you would concur with, and you would push here in the UK?
Shall I go first? I don't think we'll go down that route. I think we're we're not likely to put in legislation that would cause that. Though we are, OPRL are currently talking to a couple of other big organisations who have influence at retail level about greenwashing and unjustified environmental claims, because I'm sure everyone on this panel and most of the audience see claims that make them twitch. So so we need to get rid of some of the misinformation on the packs as well. So we need to make it so that makes the correct labels stand out. And I think if consumers and citizens know that those labels aren't justified, or it's just something, you know, that say Rob decides he's going to put on all of his stuff made from, you know, magic stuff that will reduce your age less, you know, or whatever, increase your IQ points by 5 or whatever, and he does all of that. If everyone goes, I can't lie on all their labeling, it wouldn't last for very long. I picked Rob because I know they're very, very careful about any claims they put on any of their labels. But I think it's important to raise the profile of the useful labels and the useful claims. And I think it would be quite nice if we saw, for example, TV programs that instead of saying, oh, who doesn't understand Mobius loop or polymer resin codes, they said, right, who actually does understand these? Whereas they pick the ones nobody understands, usually.
Yeah, well, that's what making television is about, isn't it? Making scandal. Percy, you've just had in Ireland the publication of the National Waste Plan.
Yeah.
Could you just mention in terms of the bio waste, what that foresees?
Yeah, so in our new waste plan that was published, it foresees where currently we have a limit where householders above populations of 500 have to be provided with a food waste brown bin collection service. Envisaged that's going to be removed going forward. There's other positive aspects in it as well, talking about trying to support the composting and AD sector in Ireland. Interestingly, the comment that was just brought up there about the legislation and labeling of biodegradable, that came up in a recent webinar where I was on with our Department of Environment. That's something we're going to be talking to them about. That we're aware of the situation in Belgium, but also recently in Washington in America, they have legislation there as well, which I believe is mandating just the word compostable. And I think from our point of view, my point of view, it'd be welcomed where we can try and remove as much of this jargon and keep it as simple as possible, because there are products that people are selling as biodegradable and they might be green in color and people are paying a premium to buy those products, but in fact they're not compostable to EN 13432. So I know that has been identified in some public settings at the moment where there are some very bright green cutlery that's been used, and it turns out it's not certified TN 13432, but it's biodegradable, looks green, it looks green, it must be green, but it's not. So I think with legislation removing this terminology, that might try and improve the situation where only EN 13432 certified materials are used, which we know are fine. I suppose in Ireland, as we're still in the EU, unlike yourselves, we will be banning oxo-degradables as well, in line with the EU as well going forward. I don't know the exact date of that, but that will be happening as well.
Yeah, Scotland and Wales also have published their single-use plastic directives or legislation drafts, which also ban oxo-degradables and materials, plastic materials which have additives in them. And we welcome that, and we hope also that England goes down the same route. Rob, Rob Cole, can you allow Paul Thompson in? And while you're doing that, please, Paul, before you speak, Rob Thompson at the Co-op, you have rolled out your carrier bags, the dual-use food waste bin liner carrier bags, a lot of councils in the UK. But I know that in Wales, you have a problem doing that, although there are food waste collections across the whole of Wales. Is there a particular reason for that?
Well, the Welsh Assembly government do have some concerns around the use of those materials. I think they're concerned that they could potentially contaminate the recycling, the mechanical recycling of conventional plastics. So we have been in consultation with them for a while now. And I think we will be planning a trial sometime soon in Wales. But I think that's the main concern really from the Welsh Assembly government. It would be the fact that they're concerned that consumers would dispose of them through conventional plastic recycling routes.
Yes, as if they were. But that's another question, isn't it? RAP data yesterday showed that only 4% of films in the UK are recycled. So it's...
Well, we've got a trial ongoing at the moment in 50 stores in the south of England to collect any type of flexible film, which is in line with the flexible packaging roadmap of the UK Plastics Pact. So that trial will be live for the next 2 months, and then we'll be doing some composition analysis to work out what types of materials people are bringing back and what are the end markets that we can put that recycler into. And if that trial is deemed to be a success, then we'll be rolling that out to one collection point in every community, our definition of which is 1,511 stores, which means that all of our customers will be no more than 10 miles away from a collection point. So what we're trying to do is we don't want to be a recycler long term. We're trying to do that in collaboration with the UK Plastics Pact Flexibles Roadmap, just to prove that it is possible and that there is a valuable end market for that material. So that in the long run, we want the local authorities to take that system off us.
Thank you, Rob. And Paul Thompson, the Real Certification Schemes Company. Paul, you had a comment to make there about the connection between EN 13432 and PAS 100.
Thanks, David. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Excellent. So yes, I mean, I put the point in the Q&A, but Real operate the certification schemes to the PAS 100 for compost and PAS 110 for digestate. And obviously the point was made that the output contamination testing for both those, particularly for plastics, is obviously much tighter than EN 13432. And sort of implying that that's an inconsistency that should be resolved by essentially making those levels the same. Take the point on testing for plant biomass, which seems like that's an interesting question for the difference there. But the broader point about levels, I kind of don't really see an argument for bringing those in line, or at least I can't think it's plausible that the PAS levels would be relaxed from where they are now. Obviously this is towards end of waste, which means that there are far fewer controls on it when you spread it on land, and there's so much pressure on plastic contaminants that actually, if anything, you would expect those levels to be tightened in parallel with changes at input contaminations via the permitting system. So there's a review of those quality protocols at the moment, which has been running basically the entire year, to demonstrate as the framework for the PAS sit underneath. We're hopeful that the outcome of that will be published in the next month or so. EA has been flagging for quite some time roughly what people would expect. they're expected to say that those protocols aren't quite good enough as they are, but that they're happy to oversee a process of revision of those protocols. And I think it's highly likely that one of the outcomes of that would then be a revision of the PASs.
Thanks, Paul, for that note. As BBIA, we are contributing to that process, and naturally we support the tightest possible rules.
Yeah.
We can't keep putting plastics to soil.
Yeah.
Now, I'm going to wrap up, ladies and gentlemen. Are there any last-minute comments that any of the panelists wish to make, and they feel that they have a point that they need to get across, that they want to emphasize? If not, well, there's 2 upcoming appointments in the next week, which Rob has put here in the chat. That BBIA, one of which BBIA is organising, and that is with the European Parliament next, the 22nd of September. We'll be talking there specifically about the problem of contamination of food waste collections from plastics. It's not just a UK problem, it's a whole problem across the EU, where we have food waste collections coming into place in 2023. And then on a personal note, ladies and gentlemen, I've just published a book, and on the 23rd of September, there's a link there. I'd be delighted if you would all join me in the launch of this book and the panel that will be discussing it and trashing it. I hope not, and that some of you will read it. And look forward to seeing you there for a relaxed discussion around the environment and politics and finance, which is what my book is about. So. Thank you to Futamura for organising this, and thank you to our panellists, Margaret, Rob, Percy and Lucy for talking. If there are specific questions that you would like to ask any of the panellists, send them through to us. We will forward them to them for you, and the slides and the video of the webinar will shortly be available for all of you to see on our website. See you on the 22nd, see you on the 23rd, and see you on the 28th for the last in the Futamura series with BBIA. Thanks very much to the speakers. Thanks very much to you all for listening. Thanks.
Thank you.